Hey everyone, it's Matt here to recap December and really 2025. So let's hop right into it. First off, for December, finished with on a strong note. Average revenue per location was 18,700. Compare that to last year at 13,700. We really had a nice jump. So about a $5,000 per month year over year jump in average revenue. If we look at average revenue per location year over date, 80% growth year over year. And so really, really strong growth. Really kind of shows that we're still in that that young stage in terms of maturity of growth. We'll eventually kind of get to a more mature stage in terms of growth, and we're not going to see that 80% jump year over year. As a matter of fact, if we saw 80% next year, you're talking about revenue that's roughly almost $500,000. And so I think what we'll probably see next year is we'll probably still see strong growth, but if we see the same numerical dollar in growth, you're really kind of looking at that point at about 30 to 40% growth. And so I think that's really kind of where the target should lie. Some really good things that we saw in average revenue per appointment, both in the current month and the current year. So last year, this average revenue per appointment in December was $504. And so we saw that jump up about 7.5%. Average revenue for the year last year, that was $355. So that jumped up about 4% year over year. And that's really, really important because, especially as we see in the current environment where inflation really is a real thing, especially when a lot of what we're talking about in terms of our costs are subcontractor costs, and that is adding in people, that's adding in fuel costs, things that really, really are seeing inflation year over year. So if there's one takeaway I can leave you with from this kind of review of our financials, it's definitely that sometime point in 2026, we need to be looking at our pricing and making sure that we are keeping pace with what we are seeing on the cost side. Typically, that's somewhere between 3 and 5%. And so keep that in mind. In terms of our appointments, we have this general trend down. That's the exact same thing that we saw last year. It's more of a seasonal move than anything else. Our December this year was our lowest amount in terms of appointments, but I'm going to get to that here in a second. It actually was one of our higher amounts in revenue per appointment. And so you can see here, our revenue per appointment was 543. Year to date, 370. So we're quite a bit over our average. So even those smaller appointments, typically larger appointments that we saw in December, as you can see here, going back to the beginning of this year, we don't really see this to start dramatically increase until we get to the spring. If depending on where the weather is where you're at, I'm here in Colorado, we've really yet to see winter. And so maybe that happens to slide up. Of course, I know for those of us that are counting on any sort of revenue when it comes into plowing, snow removal, things like that can be impacted. I want to talk about this appointment completion percentage, this 90%, and we've seen this dip down a little bit in the last couple months. But if we really think about what this means, that means that 9 out of 10 of our appointments are being completed as scheduled. But that also means that 1 out of 10 aren't. And so if you think about that, if we're scheduling 5 appointments every day, that means that once every other day, an appointment's not being completed for some reason. And so really what I think we want to see is we want to see that really kind of creep up even to 95%. That's going to make a huge difference in terms of that appointment completion percentage, which really is important from both a customer service perspective but also more importantly from really a cost perspective. If we can keep those appointments on the books, that's just less cost than having to reschedule and having to do kind of all the admin around what goes around canceling an appointment, even with our subcontractors and things like that. As we looked at proposals, we really had a strong year. Over the February to December period last year, and we don't have January number of proposals in ServiceMinder, but from February to December last year, we did 26 million in proposals. This year in that same period, so again, I cut off the January, from February to December, we did 28 million in proposals. And why is that important? Well, if we look at it last year off 26 million in proposals, we grew on average 108,000 per location system-wide. And so if we did 28 million this year, if we can kind of keep on that pace, you're really looking at some predictable growth in terms of around $100,000 a year up to a certain point. As we look at total number of proposals in December, Last year we did 308. This year we did 395. So we're seeing both number and volume continue to increase. One of the changes we saw was our close rate. Our close rate last year was about 34%. This year it's about 32%. I'm not really worried about a decline because as we see a higher number of proposals, we're going to see a little bit lower of a close rate. And that's perfectly acceptable. That doesn't really mean that we need to change any behavior there. I think that's just fine. Now, maybe the best news on this slide outside of the proposal volume is this average days to close. And so as we sit here today, that's 11. And remember, that doesn't really even include some of the proposals given out at the back half of December. Now, because December is that holiday month, we have Christmas in there. There probably is not that same volume of proposals in the back half of the month. So we might not see this number be affected as we have previous months. But 11 days to close, and let me put that in perspective. Last December, that was 37 days to close. So deals closing almost 4 weeks sooner this December than where they were last December. And think of just how important that is when you are having to follow up less on deals. You're able to get out and give more proposals. We've seen that in the math in terms of total proposals system wide. That's 20 per location. Really, really great metric in terms of future success and what we can kind of see out there. Definitely something we want to kind of keep up. Even in months before that, you see November was 15, October was 18. So we really are closing those deals significantly faster than where we were about a year ago. Lastly, when we look at this proposal breakdown, year to date, we had over 1,500 proposals that were over $5,000 in value, and you can see the acceptance rate in December was 6%, but year to date 10%. It's kind of a high risk, high reward, right? Like if we're putting out those large proposals, we're spending time on those. We're getting about 1 in 10 of those back in, and so I definitely think that is something to kind of keep in mind. That we are seeing a higher success rate on those. Now we didn't in December, but again, if I go back to last year and look at our acceptance rate on these proposals over $5,000, we're going to see a much lower percent. That came in just over 7% last year. So we are getting more of the higher value proposals accepted. But again, if I look at the under 5,000, we have a trailing 12-month acceptance rate of 38%. So it's almost 4 in 10 of those being accepted. We're seeing a significantly higher total of those. And those also account for typically about 3 out of every 4 proposals we're giving out. So when we look at acceptance rate by customer, again, our acceptance rate went from 34% system-wide last year to 32% this year. We didn't see a ton of movement here. The movement that we did see is this existing customer acceptance rate stayed the same. It was 43% last year, 43% this year. What did move is our non-existing customers, so new customers essentially. That proposal rate dropped from 24% last year to 22% this year. Again, not something I'm really worried about. As we give more proposals out, we're just going to see a lower acceptance rate. That's something we have to accept. One of the good things we saw is that our proposals given out to existing customers last year was 56%. Our proposals given to new customers last year was 44%. So we kind of saw that flip. And I think that's really good news. That means we're getting out there, we're identifying more new customers. That's really how we're going to continue to grow the business is to identify those new customers, bring them in, and then continue to give them proposals on enhancements, things like that, because then we know that our acceptance rate on those is pretty high. So something just to kind of keep in mind. When I look at our marketing channels, you can see kind of where our proposals are coming from: existing, enhancement bids, referral, walk-ins. Really, the only thing to note on here is that this walk-in percentage last year used to be 10%. So we've seen more and more proposals come in through different methods than walk-in. If I can leave you with one thing here, it really is to have a plan around those referrals. If we had to take a look, and I'm sure I could dig into this data, but if we had to take a look, my guess is if existing customers have the highest, if enhancement and existing have the highest, referral probably has the next highest acceptance rate. So something to keep in mind. If I can leave you with 3 things, I'll leave you with the 3 Ps. That's pricing. Make sure that we're looking at our pricing for this year. We should see a 3 to 5% bump just so that we can keep up with our vendor pricing that we're going to see. Proposals, continue to go out and give those proposals. again, if we see 28 to $30 million system wide again next year, I think we can have some very predictable growth. We grew $108,000 this year off of what that volume. We should be able to grow a similar amount next year. And then lastly, have a plan for referrals. So that's the third P. Plan around those referrals. Let's try to boost that number up. We know that that's how we can get new customers in the door. That's our biggest lead for new customers. So let's have a plan around asking our current clients for those referrals. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks again. Talk to you later.